Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to this new edition of Historical Sketches. One and 100,000 is the title of a novel by Italian author Luigi Pirandello, where one refers to the image that everyone has of himself, no one refers to what the protagonist decides to be at the end of the novel, and 100,000 refers to the images that others have of us. As the plot of the novel unfolds, the protagonist discovers that he really does not know what he really is, leading him to realize that he is an instinctive intellectual chameleon, one person wearing 1,000 masks, one for each person that he knows. Unable to sort out and understand his own personality, the only way out of the dilemma is madness. He liquidates, therefore, all his assets and enters voluntarily into an insane asylum. For only there, he can escape from life's, if we can say, necessary strategies, tactics, disguises, and paradoxes. Between this protagonist's choice and Hamlet's, for example, a man's life is no more than to say one, or what a piece of work is man, and yet what is this quintessence of dust, etc., etc. Between these choices lay essentially infinite options and variations on the theme. Options available and displayed at large, notably by the corporate government media when describing the life or character of the same person. And here the description reflects the category assigned to the person, to the character, to him or to her. In turn, the variable winds of politics affect both the category and the characterization of the individual. In the instance, as we know, Vladimir Putin was re-elected president of Russia in 2012. However, beginning in 2011, there began to appear in the Western press somewhat venomous articles against him. Clearly, Putin was popular in Russia and had the support of the greatest part of the population, because, as we know, he tried, among other things, to repair some of the damage inflicted on Russia by Gorbachev and Yeltsin, and to reconstitute and restore the historical heritage of Russia, of the Russian Empire rather, that the Tsars built after the Treaty of Pereyaslav in 1684, which, as we know, and by the way, made Ukraine an integral part of Russia. All of which made the Western powers feel as uncomfortable of, clearly, not having any specific immediate political reasons to attack him. One available alternative was to attack his physical and mental health. The prime movers behind the operation being perhaps unconscious, indifferent, or unaware that the psychiatrization of the adversary is one entry door for their own totalitarianism, be it in medicine, ideology, politics, or even science at large. Here I will examine some examples from the French press. Example of Putin. Examples for which I am indirectly indebted to, in my view, the best candidate for the French presidency of France and for France. His name is François Asselineau, founder of the UPR, or the Union Populaire Républicaine. However, due to the machinations of the deep state and of the oligarchs-owned, media-driven establishment, Asselineau was given but 0.002 airtime compared to his political adversaries. Adversaries who, flattering themselves into a very favorable opinion of their own abilities, look down on all others who use reason rather than platitudes as a race of inferior beings, unless, of course, sanctified by the easily purchased and corrupted praise of the bribed media. As an aside, but somewhat relevant to the current historical moment, the European Union's reaction to the Russian Federation's special operation in Ukraine demonstrates with dramatic evidence the thesis described in my article and video, The Curious History of American Exceptionalism. Namely that, contrary to imposed canonical history, the real founders of the European Union were the well-remunerated pawns of a Masonic sect who imposed their vision of an Orwellian-style Europe as an unquestioning vassal of America, including the injunction and prescription of an ideology by means of platitudes and massive crowd manipulation, as very clearly illustrated by George Bernays, worthy nephew of that master of perversion, Sigmund Freud. Besides, the last manifestations of the European Union fit reasonably closely the Europe that Count Coudenhove-Kalergi envisioned in his book Praktischer Idealism, allowing for some modification produced by the inevitable absence of accuracy when predicting the future. In a nutshell, Kalergi's European Union would be a stateless conglomerate led by the best among the chosen people, intermarried with the best of the European nobility, and lording over a mass of inferior beings, ethnically commingled and assigned to menial jobs performed in close and restricted environments. We may ask ourselves how certain alterations of reality are possible, such as those currently involved in the demonization of Russia and in the deformation of the conditions that made this special military operation in Ukraine, I would say, and many agree, inevitable. Even a functional cretin could understand that they are manipulations, that someone is taking possession of his emotional capital, so to speak, of his Pavlovian reactions, and even of his carelessness, incessantly promoted and cultivated for their advantage by the apostles of the thought unique. Veritable moral carcasses who would say anything for money, those ready to praise at morning what they blame at night, but always think the last opinion right. It is an easy game, for they cheat on the evidence and profit from what is left unsaid. For example, even the fascist danger, which not long ago was conspicuously paraded to discourage any sense of independence among the Europeans, themselves corralled into a kind of feudal domain of America, even the fascist danger has been converted into a praiseworthy contemporary Nazism, as evident in the now popular branch of the Ukrainian army, openly praised by the Western press and intelligentsia. And now some extract from the French press. In September 2011, the editorial board of the magazine Voici informs us that Putin stuffs himself with Botox, with the implication being that Putin is weird. And in December 2013, the magazine L'Actualité finds out that an American psychologist has conducted a thorough analysis of Putin's personality, and he concluded that Vladimir Putin is but a traumatized orphan with homosexual tendency who has become a misanthropist, though with an unbelievable luck as high as Mount Elbrus, which is a mountain in the Caucasus. This analysis must be seen in the context of the then impending coup d'etat in Ukraine, organized by US money, declared cost being, as you know, $5 billion, under the guidance of Undersecretary Victoria Nuland, whose real name is Nudelman, compared to whom, in my view, any of the witches of Macbeth could be images images of the feminine ideal as represented by Botticelli's painting of Spring. And his conversation with the US ambassador in Kiev acquired worldwide notoriety thanks to her elegant characterization of and good wishes to the Europeans. The Crimea's referendum and its reattachment to Russia further inspired the press. The Daily of Physician, Quotidien du Médecin, informs its readers about a Pentagon report which concluded that Vladimir Putin is affected by the Asperger's syndrome, which is a developmental disorder discovered in 1954 by Hans Asperger, affecting the ability to effectively socialize and communicate. It partakes, according to the scientists, of the symptoms of autism, and the readers are informed so accordingly. People with this condition may be socially awkward and have an all-absorbing interest in specific topics. Communication training and behavioral therapy, writes the journalist benevolently, can help people with the Asperger's syndrome learn to socialize more successfully. Here, we could say, the basic political idea is to medicalize the conditions of him who is now openly considered an adversary. In March 2015, the famous Le Monde tells its readers that either Putin died or he went to Switzerland to be with his lover, who was on the point of delivery. Soit Putin est mort, soit son amante a accouché en Suisse. In December 2015, the magazine Science and the Future, Science et Avenir, analyzes and concentrates on Putin's style of walking, which is deemed to be characteristics of a gunslinger, la démarche du flingueur. More accurately, some American neurologists had carefully studied Putin's singular walking dynamics. Initially, they had discovered in it symptoms of Parkinson's disease, but after careful analysis, they arrived at the gunslinger walk diagnosis. In September 2019, a TV program of France Culture informs the viewers that Putin is afraid of sorcerers, shamans. The interim conclusion is or was that besides being irrational, Putin has the instinct of a gunslinger up to no good. 2020 was the year of COVID and of the geopolitics of vaccination. As we know, Russia was the first to develop a vaccine called Sputnik, as we know Sputnik 5, which was not of the so-called messenger RNA type, essentially not involved in the genetics of the DNA of the patient. Conclusion: according to the French press at large, the Russian vaccine was Oriental, or at least not Western, and by inference Putin belongs to the Eastern domain. Incidentally, in Europe, and that I only know of, only the little old state of San Marino, which is a mountainous independent island of land surrounded by Italy, only San Marino adopted and imported the Sputnik vaccine from Russia. And I quote here the conclusions from the certified independent medical report signed by a hefty number of doctors and clinicians. The interim analysis confirmed the good tolerability profile in the over 60 years old age group after both doses. Regarding short-term solicited AEFI, or adverse event following immunization, to Sputnik 5. The median age of those vaccinated with Sputnik 5 has been 68 years old. But the anti-Putin psychological warfare is not finished. November 2020, the magazine is a genocide. Vladimir Putin is the Russian president affected by Parkinson's illness. According to several sources relayed by The Sun, which is, as we know, a British tabloid, the Russian president could be affected by the Parkinson disease. November 2020, magazine Closer. Vladimir Putin is ill with cancer and underwent a surgical operation in secret, disquieting accusation on his state of health. April 2021, widely circulated video titled "Is Vladimir Putin under cortisone treatment? Mystery on his state of health." November 2021, Le Sport. A new face for Vladimir Putin. Did he undergo plastic surgery? Unrecognizable, Putin's state of health is worrying. November 2021, Putin begins assembling forces at the border of Ukraine. West France published an unusually accurate statement. Putin hopes that there will be a solution to the crisis involving Ukraine, while he accuses Washington of using Ukraine as an instrument for involving Russia into an armed conflict. December 2021, Le Monde. In a forthcoming telephone conversation, Joe Biden will propose a diplomatic avenue to resolve this Ukraine crisis. This is the second telephone conversation in 2 months to find a solution. In the meantime, substantial military exercises occur in the west of Ukraine, involving American and NATO troops, as we know. It is well known that the CIA formed and trained groups or troops of the Azov Regiment for renewed actions or operations against the population of the Donbass. It is now history that Washington gave but vague answers to Russia's request for written guarantees about Ukraine not being part of NATO, and the rest we already know. But now all information regarding Putin's alleged state of physical and psychological health becomes part of what the Parisians define in their argot bourrage de crâne, an expression, this bourrage de crâne, born at the time of World War I and referring to the totally unbelievable propaganda in which it is still uncertain whether the English or the French won the championship. For example, that the German soldiers used to cut the arms of babies and similar. February 24, 2022, from the magazine Lviv. Putin is brutal, paranoid and isolated, thus report qualified Western analysts. February 28, 2022, from TDN Actualité. Vladimir Putin is in complete crisis of paranoia. Has he become completely mad? Then we go to March 4, 2022, L'édition du soir. What is the syndrome of hubris, this feeling of omnipotence associated with Putin? Then we go to March 11, 2022, Le Figaro. Sergei Zhimov. At the Andropov Institute, Vladimir Putin had been declared unfit, supposedly due to flat feet. And in March 15, 2022, from Yahoo Actualité, spies assure that Vladimir Putin suffers from a cerebral disorder caused by his cancer treatment. Then we go to March 18, 2022, Paris Match. Putin is not senile or deranged, he is an obsessed person who has lost the sense of reality. The Paris Match verdict was published after Putin made the following statement. Once more I emphasize today that our soldiers, our officers in the territory of Ukraine, fight for Russia, for the people of the Donbass, for the demilitarization, for the denazification of Ukraine, so that this territory that for more than 30 years has been transformed into an anti-Russian entity with all sorts of weapons, perhaps even nuclear, can be liberated. We must be proud of our armed forces. We will continue to celebrate the memory of our comrades fallen in combat. We will do everything possible to protect their families, provide education for their sons and daughters. I am asking you to celebrate the memory of those who lost their lives during the special operation in Ukraine. Still, on March 24, 2022, the Gala magazine informs its reader that, says Lyudmila, ex-wife of Vladimir Putin, alcohol and the previous accident, his life is a complete wreck. In summary, Putin is filled with Botox, is antisocial, is someone who had an extremely difficult childhood, suffers from the Asperger syndrome or disease, he was either dead or traveled to Switzerland, has the gunslinger syndrome, and suffers from Parkinson's disease. On top of all this, he suffers from cancer that forces him to undergo cortisone treatment and aesthetic surgery. He is brutal, paranoid, completely mad, and finally, he is affected by the hubris syndrome, the folly of greatness. When younger, he had been declared unfit due to flat feet, has cerebral issues connected with cancer treatment, is an obsessed individual who lost a sense of reality, has given a very hard time to all who are around him, and his first wife became an alcoholic because she could no longer put up with him. So much for the president of perhaps the most powerful nuclear nation in the world. Though it should not be a surprise, to quote Paul Valéry, "He who cannot attack the reasoning attacks the reasoner." Given that, as of the date of this text, France is in the midst of a presidential election, the reader should be offered, I think, a comparative analysis of the current French president. Readers may agree that, after comparing statements by Putin and by Macron, Macron overwhelmingly wins the contest as who is the more nuts, batty, loopy, dotty or potty. And here is an extract from a live interview translated literally and without alterations. "And therefore, because we are in nature, there are trees around us, and rivers, and fish. There are brothers and sisters, and it is a common patrimonial treasure. And if we think that we can be happy through forgetfulness, we forget the duties of our roots. We do not eat money, I confirm it. It cannot be eaten. It cannot be breathed. It cannot be the object of love, otherwise it becomes very dangerous. Think spring, my friends. Spring is to reconcile the ambition with the real. But to think spring does not mean to promise to everyone that everything goes, that everything is already there, that the harvest is already there without sowing the seeds, that the harvest can be promised to everyone. I must tell you, think spring and think spring first. And when we construct our thoughts of spring, that is to construct the future, because to think spring in those moments means to have the spirit of responsibility. But in order to think spring, it is necessary not to despair when everything looks sad. When everything seems gloomy, it is necessary to think spring." Unless I'm mistaken, this is senseless speaking, or speaking such a sense cannot untie. And yet, this individual has been thus far elected as the best of France. Even though the bewildered observer may deduce and conclude that collective judgment has fled to brutish beasts, and men have lost their reason. Nor we should forget his remarkable action plan for the non-COVID vaccinated, merde non-vaccinés, which needs no translation. Besides, the readers will already know, or may prefer not to know, about some of the scandals, financials and otherwise, that this Rothschild's creature and enfant prodige has been the protagonist of. Yet, when compared to the eloquence of Joseph Robinette Biden, even Macron's soliloquy almost surges to Shakespearean level. As an example, here is an extract from a Biden's live TV presentation.
So, with regard to your family in particular, part of it is not just that they see you on television and trust you. The people who seem to have the most impact are that for that 17-year-old kid, the kid he or she plays ball with. Mm-hmm. You got the vaccination?
Yeah.
Are you okay? I mean, you see, no, it works. Or or the mom and dad, or the neighbor, or when you're go to church or when you're. No, I really mean it. There are trusted interlocutors. Think of the people. If your kid wanted to find out whether or not there's a man on the moon or whatever, something, or, whether those aliens are here or not, who are the people they talk to beyond the kids who love talking about it?
The reader will draw his or her conclusions. Actually, in some ways, even accounting for the enormity of the phenomenon, a publicly acknowledged, somewhat mentally impaired person at the head of the hegemon, it is difficult not to feel sorry for the character. One could say that he is the product of a system whose beneficiaries, as clear as it is the summer sun, esteem folly over reason, void over content, and the exuberance of nothingness, especially when fearing for their material interest, even at the current cost of a possible Armageddon. This principle, philosophy or mode of thought being in place, even Joe Robinette Biden's gross lies partake of the script of an operetta, including his sordid dealings with his sordid son, and when he swears that he is made of truth, he expects us to believe him, though we know he lies. Besides, in some ways, Biden also represents the lunatic who has been chosen to run the asylum. Perhaps, some in his entourage, though I cannot think of who, may talk with him about the consistency of his narrative, even when read on the teleprompter, and tell him that the correlation between the information that he provides and the facts, insofar as they can be determined and demonstrated, is such as to cause epistemological problems of sufficient magnitude as to lay upon the logical and semantic resources of the English language a heavier burden than they can be reasonably expected to bear. Nevertheless, Biden's cabinet is not far behind in the realm of veracity, producing continuous lies pronounced in every language and stuffing the ears of men with false reports. The much maligned but otherwise witty and intelligent Emperor Caligula placed his noble horse among the Roman senator, and by so doing he wanted to underline and underscore their moral turpitude, voracity, usury, and the obtuseness accompanying the iniquities that they inflicted on the just and decent. Seneca and other historians tied to the interests of the establishment said that Caligula was mad, but they were perhaps the advocate of the cancel culture of the time, the servants of the New Age, creed and philosophy. They won then, as they have won for now, and Joe Robinette Biden may be their befitting, timeless emblem. Further considering that, thus far, Biden's most presidential performance was probably the extended fart produced when close to the consort of the next King of England. Thank you for watching, and as always, may all the number of the stars give light to your fair way. Good night.